G'day everyone, welcome to another edition of Chris Rankin's Music Crush. I just thought I'd make a video of just showing some of the excellent sort of albums that I've been listening to. Been listening to a lot of music lately at home, so I thought I'd just share a little bit different today, a bit of a mix. And yes, I am quite an obsessed heavy metal fan, and a lot, a decent percentage, I will say, of my collection is all things metal. But I love all the genres. I do, and I listen to all the genres. I have quite a large percentage of pop, jazz, getting a lot more, prog rock, obviously heaps, blues, soul, some hip hop, quite a fair bit of hip hop. Pretty much everything you can think of. So it's all throughout my collection. So yeah. I do generally, when I pull out of a few albums out of the rack, it is generally a fair bit of a mix. It's not always necessarily the one genre. So I thought I'd just show you what I'm listening to. Maybe there's some things you haven't seen before or heard before, and you'll be able to check them out. And maybe there's some things that you do know and love very well, and it'll just give you a bit of a jolt to perhaps pull it out of your rack and have a listen to. So I'll get started. First up, so let me show you the band and the album. The band is Mighty Baby, and the album is also Mighty Baby, and this is a 1969 album. The band is from London, England. They only released this and one other album in 1971, and then they sort of broke up not long after 1971 and the second album. Now this album is heavy psychedelic rock, a little bit bluesy, a little bit prog rock here and there, but pretty much heavy psych, but a little bit eclectic at times, some interesting sounds. There's some piano and flute, and it does get quite bluesy at times. But how I came about this album is back in March, April last year, when the dreaded pandemic was really kicking in and we had a lot of spare time and all. There was a lot of album cover images in my mind of albums that I'd heard when I was a young kid, but of course I had no way of knowing what they were or what they are, and they'd always been rattling around in my brain. So with that extra spare time, I went through with some of those album cover images in my mind, and I searched through using some triggers that I could possibly help and to find these album covers and albums. And then I bought quite a few of those ones that I hadn't listened to since the late 70s, that were played by my uncle or dad or people around me. And this was one of them, Mighty Baby, Mighty Baby. There'll be a few that I will show in the next few weeks or so when I make videos, and I'll mention that again. It was a really fun thing to do, and it was great to just take my time, search through and find these great albums that I hadn't listened to in about 40 years. So yeah, Mighty Baby, Mighty Baby. Some of my favourites on here, Egyptian Tomb is the opener. Start with a big hook, an amazing song, really gets stuck in your head quite well. Also, Same Way from the Sun, it's a really good song. And Trials of a City, a little bit longer, and it sort of gets into a bit of a jam band type sound throughout the song. Not really that heavy, there are some crunchy moments and some heavier crunchy moments in the album, but yeah, pretty much heavy psych is probably the best way to describe it. So Mighty Baby, 1969. So next, so this band, first of all, the band is called Mono, and they are from Tokyo, Japan. They're a post-rock band, instrumental. Also quite avant-garde in their delivery, a little bit experimental at times. Now I saw this band a few years back. I reckon it was about 2014. I saw them live. They came to Perth, and that's where I got this album, was at the gig. I quite often do that if I can, because if you buy I always think if you buy the album at the gig, the money goes straight to the band. It also saves you on postage as well. I did have another couple of their albums already, but I'd always wanted this one, and I saw it on their merch table and bought it. So good. They were amazing live. Lots of big soundscapes. There's some really quiet, pretty moments, and then there's some really sort of uprising, powerful moments that just create almost like a cinematic experience when you're listening to them. The songs can be a little bit long, they're quite long, but they never feel like they're overly long. It feels like you're in it with them, and it's part of the whole escapism. So, I mean, this album is over an hour long. It's an hour and 6 minutes long. So, you know, it's not an album that you have and listen to the singles, so forth. It's just an album you put on and just indulge and just enjoy the sound and the soundscapes. Some of my favourites on here are Burial at Sea, Pure as Snow, and The Battle to Heaven. Fantastic. And let me just show you one little thing that I thought that was pretty cool. And this, so when I bought the CD, I opened it up, and I've kept it for later. You get this little card in the CD. This is when I bought it at the gig. You get this little card in the CD that says thank you. So isn't that nice? Isn't that sweet? Very, you know, I'm sure it's in every CD, but it kind of felt personal. So yeah, fantastic album, a fantastic band. Mono, they have quite a few albums. From memory, I think this is the 5th album. I have the 4th album as well. I'm pretty sure this is the 5th album. So yeah, Hymns to the Immortal Wind, that's called. Right, so I'm sure by now, and the people that know me as well, know that Death is one of my favourite bands of all time. They are easily in my top 4 favourite metal bands of all time. I always think that Sir Chuck Schuldiner was an absolute genius. He's one of my favourite musicians of all time. Just love their music to bits and what he did for me. But anyway, I've been listening to this again. This is Mantas. So before there was Death, there was Mantas. So this was kind of the first version of Death. And this is a CD that came out in 2012. And it's a collection of all their demos and so forth together. And the song Legion of Doom, which later on appeared on the Scream Bloody Gore album, on here, it's just so raw and menacing and evil, and that main big riff that you hear in Legion of Doom is just absolutely magnificent. Just love it to bits. So Death was a very important band for me. Obviously in the late 70s as a little kid, and all through the 80s, I became a pretty big heavy metal fan for sure. Just loved everything, thought I knew everything as a young kid, and you know, of course you do, you read all the mags and as much as you know. And then in 1987, not long after it was released, at a music store in Perth, I got to hear parts of Death, Scream Bloody Gore, and that was it. It changed my world completely forever in music, and I've been a massive extreme metal fan, and in particularly death metal fan ever since, and the band Death, all because of Death, Scream Bloody Gore. There was another one as well that I heard around that time, Messiah, Extreme Cold Weather. That also helped as well. But I mean, when you look at this album here, Mantas, Death by Metal, this came out in 1984, so you know, this was pretty much one of the earliest forms of death metal there was. You know, obviously Celtic Frost and Morbid Tales was around there as well, and then you know, Seven Churches as well not long after that. But yeah, this is really one of the earliest forms of death metal, and this is so good. This is highly cherished by me. Right, a band from Australia, not from Perth this time. This band is from Melbourne, Victoria. Even though I've lived most of my life in Perth, I was actually born in Melbourne and do still feel a pretty strong connection to Melbourne. I still have some family over there as well. So this is the band Septeris and their album Tacit. They're still together as far as I know. They only ever released this one album so far. This came out in 2013. Thrash album, thrash band, but quite heavy and quite aggressive. For the thrash band, I guess if you think of the heavy era of Testament, and the sort of heavy, aggressive, really aggressive era of Exodus, you can sort of know what you're getting with this. Brilliant album. I love this. It's really good. Quite underrated. Not a very well-known band, even in Australia. Some of my favourites on here, Nothing of Value. You've got Undefeatable and For Flesh and Future. Now, there are some parts where they get quite mid-tempo and a little bit heavier. So it does sort of start to get into groove metal, although I would never call any of this groove metal, just because it's the mid-tempo and you've got those big hook riffs. You can hear that somewhat. So yeah, Septeris and Tacit from Melbourne, Australia. Now, this lady, she's without a doubt one of my favourite artists of all time. Growing up in the late, being a kid and growing up in the late 70s and 80s, her music was everywhere. There was a show that I've talked about before called Countdown on Australian TV, and it was a music show. It went for about an hour long, and it was, it was all the new music, the latest music, interviews. They had bands perform in the studio and all sorts of things. They used to do a section or the end of the show where they would count down the top 10 singles currently, which is where the name of the show, Countdown. Now, why I'm talking about this is I used to watch that show religiously every Saturday and Sunday, and this lady was on that show a lot, and that's how I formed my love for her and her music. I think she's just one of the greatest of all time, and I am talking about Kate Bush. I think she's amazing. This is my favourite album of hers, and I'm very comfortable in saying that I think this album is perfect. It's flawless in every way. I think it's just one of the greatest things ever made. I mean, of course, you've got Running Up That Hill, which is just one of the greatest pop songs of all times, or pop rock, whatever you want to call it. Just brilliant, just amazing. And you've also got, I mean, Hounds of Love is brilliant. I mean, everything on this album is so good. But I actually like Cloud Busting even more than Running Up That Hill. That's my favourite Kate Bush song of all time. Although I do love Rubber Band Girl too, which on that album, I really still want to get that album, but it's always so expensive when I see the reissues of Red Shoes, because it's quite often like a double album, I think, from memory, so it's quite expensive. But Cloud Busting is my favourite song of hers. It's just so uplifting. That big hook in the chorus, just I love it. It's so uplifting and it just stays with you, and it's just a song I never get sick of playing. But yeah, I love this album, Hounds of Love. This was her, I'm trying to remember, this was her 5th album. Yeah, I think I'm right, 5th album. 1985, just perfection, absolute perfection. Kate Bush, Hounds of Love. Next up, from Singapore, the band Nafrat. Abnegation is the name of the album. This is their 2nd album. This came out in 2018. I don't have their 1st album. I don't have a physical copy of that. I've been around for a fair while, about 15 years, 14, 15 years they've been around. And I've seen them live, and so last year I became quite good friends with Han Shah, the guitarist and lead vocalist of the band. So last year, Han Shah and his partner Sasha, they came down to Perth, and I was their host, and I took them all around Perth and showed them around places and all sorts of things. So we hung out for a couple of days, and then we went, all three of us went to the Cattle Decapitation concert as well. Yeah, so we were very good friends. So I first met Han Shah when I first saw this band live in Bali, and we became quite good friends there, and I bought this album. I also bought the shirt of the album, and I've been a pretty big fan since. So fantastic, very well made, really crisp and just extremely well written songs. Death metal, technical death metal would be the best way to describe it, with that awesome artwork. So Nafrat from Singapore. Next, band from Denpasar, Bali. And we have Eternal Madness. Look at that album artwork with a barong there on the front. Now, Eternal Madness, they've been around for quite a long time. Originally, this album came out in 2000, but my good friend Nyoman, who is the owner of Sadist Records, reissued this album last year, and I jumped on it immediately. It is very good. It is brutal death metal, but they mix in a lot of traditional Indonesian instruments and music and melodies. Quite a few of the songs have the gamelan music melody incorporated into the melody, the gamelan music being the very prominent music style in Indonesia. But make no mistake, it's still very brutal, but it just means that this album really stands out from a very, very big ocean of brutal death metal. The name of the album is Bongkar Batas. The title track is one of the best on here. The other really good song, I mean, there's so many great songs, but my other favourite on here is Bunuh Diri as well. So, yeah, magnificent album. 2000 originally, it came out and reissued last year on Sadist Records. My good friend Nyoman at Sadist Records. Eternal Madness, Bongkar Batas. Now, this record I got rather recently, actually. A record store that I go to, and Replay Records. I go there reasonably regularly. Well, I wouldn't say regularly. Maybe about once every, 1 or 2 months. Probably something like that. Probably once every 6 weeks, 7 weeks. And there's always quite often some gems. You know, it's one of those places where you just know it's worthwhile looking, because you know that there's every chance you could see anything there. Now, I'm quite a big fan of this band, and unfortunately, I don't know why, but I don't have much stuff of theirs physically. A few here and there. Their album, The Serpent Rings, last year was very high on my albums of the year list. And I'm talking about the band Magnum. So they're a UK band, been around for a very long time, been around since 1972, 73, something like that. They've got 21 albums out, I counted before, so a lot of albums in their discography. Most of the albums are, I would say, hard rock, melodic hard rock, a little bit AOR at times. They do get into that style. In fact, this album has a little bit of AOR on it. Very catchy, lots of hooks, songs that really stick in your head. The Serpent Rings last year was probably one of the heavier albums that they've done. That one kind of sort of stepped into melodic heavy metal, might be the best way to describe it. So this one's called Goodnight in LA. This is a 1990 album. This is an original... this is an original UK press. I will show you. I know some of you like to see. So there's the label on Polydor. Yeah, this is an original UK press. Good album, really good. Can be a little bit light at times for them, even for them. And 1990, there's a little bit of a... You can definitely hear there's almost a little bit of a lighter version of White Snake Slip of the Tongue album on this, but I'm not saying it sounds like it, but this, if you were to hear a very lighter version of White Snake Slip of the Tongue, that sort of stuff, this would be it. But, you know, Rockin' Chair is pretty I wouldn't say heavy, but it's certainly crunchy enough. Certainly, you know, yeah, get your head bobbing. You know, it's certainly crunchy and heavy enough. Mama is a pretty good sort of hard hitting song. And what else have we got? What Kind of Love Is This? Is a pretty good hard rocking song on side 2. So. Now, I got this quite cheap. Yeah, there is a bit of ring wear on this, and I got it at Replay Records, but I think I paid like $5 or $6 for it, which, you know, some of you over there in the US and all might think, oh my God, that's expensive. But for a record that's hard to find like this, paying $5 or $6 is absolutely just unreal. It's very rare that you'll see something good and reasonably rare and hard to get for that price. So the ringware is not great, but the record plays beautifully, and very, very happy to have a copy of this. So Magnum, check them out if you haven't heard them. They've got some of those great artworks by Rodney Matthews. Rodney Matthews, if you didn't check him out, he could be mistaken for some Roger Dean style artwork as well, but yeah, Rodney Matthews is the guy that did a lot of their 70s albums, and beautiful, beautiful artwork. So Magnum. Now this band, I don't really need to introduce this band so much. They are one of my favourite non-metal bands of all time. They are one of the reasons that I fell in love with adult contemporary music. King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King is one of my favourite albums of all time, and pretty much the album that started my musical journey, listening to it in the background, being played in the house, being played at family places. It was the album that really, when I was a very young kid, my mother didn't believe in playing kiddie music, so there was no such thing as those sorts of albums in our house or surrounds. My mum and dad were both sort of rockers as well, so they always had some good rocking albums. So yeah, I'm getting around to it, guys, sorry. So yeah, King Crimson. And the album I'm talking about and I'm playing at the moment is King Crimson Red. Brilliant, magnificent, one of their heavier albums. This and Lark's Tongues in Aspect, probably their two heavier albums, and some of the songs on, obviously, in the Court of the Crimson King are reasonably heavy. But wow, I'm going to use it twice today, but I think this album is flawless as well. I think this is absolute perfection, and when you consider the three of them were kind of at the end and pretty much breaking up as they were making this record. So Bruford, Wetton and Fripp, obviously. Considering that they made this is incredible. It's mind-blowing when I think about it. I mean, just the opening song, Red, one more, Red Nightmare, and then side two, only two songs, but Providence, and then, of course, Starless. And then there's the whole story about the Starless and then the Starless and Bible Black that was on the album that came before this one. And of course after this they pretty much, Fripp pretty much broke up the band, and that was it was all over. They didn't really come back until 1981 with Discipline, and it was Fripp and Bruford, and then a whole new cast of characters with Ballou on vocals and his great lead guitar work. So amazing album, considering everything as well. Just on its own, it's an amazing album, but when you consider everything that was going on and where this band was at the time, I think it's one of the greatest progressive rock albums of all time, quite easily, and I never get tired of this record, ever. This is a reissue. I'm trying to see on here when it was reissued, but it doesn't say. I think I got this about probably 2 or 3 years ago, but I might be wrong. Might have been only a year and a half ago, actually, now that I think about it. I had it on CD for a long time, and then when I saw this vinyl, might have been a year and a half ago, that I got this, now that I think about it, yeah. Had it on CD for a long time, but I saw this on vinyl and just had to get it. King Crimson Red. Now, Riot. I've got quite a few Riot. I've got them on CDs and vinyl. This is, of course, their debut. This is their 1977 debut. Now, this is not an original press. It's close. It's close. This one came out a year after the original press. Let me see if I can pull it out. Hopefully there's no static clinging as I pull it, but no. So that's on the Areola label, if you can see that. So this is a 1978 press on the Areola label. I'm sure you all know Riot pretty well, with Johnny the Seal on the front, probably the most ill-advised mascot for a heavy metal band of all time. But yeah, fantastic album. I love this. I've got, yeah, as I say, I've got quite a few of their albums. The one actually that is my favourite Riot album of all time, The Privilege of Power, I don't have. It's just bizarre, but I just don't have. From memory, I think I had it on cassette before I lost all my cassettes, which is a completely different story. And it's magnificent. You know, the best way to describe The Privilege of Power is it was the American version of, or the America's real attempt of making an Iron Maiden album, and it was just so, it's just so good, The Privilege of Power. It's the one that's got all the TVs on the front out of the shop window, but this is very good. You know, it's a little bit light at times. It's not as heavy as you might expect it to be, but it's still pretty good. The title track's very good. I love. Warrior is very good. Tokyo Rose, I think, is an excellent song. You know, there's little bits and pieces. Angel is a good song. I think Overdrive is not one of my favourites, but it's okay. And Desperation, to start off with, is just okay. But there's a lot of really good stuff on this, and it's a great album, a really good album. You know, and it's really good to, I think, as best you can, bands that you love, or like a lot at least, it's always good if you can to have their debut, because I like to hear where they start and how they started and where they went from there. So Riot, Rock City, 1977. Right, now, obviously being a metal fan in the 80s, I was a big, whatever you want to call it, hair metal, glam metal, sunset strip metal, whatever you want to call it. I loved it all. And I still do. I'm very comfortable back then with the extreme metal that I listened to and all the glam hair metal. I loved it just as much. I'll defend it to the day, and I still defend it to the day, and I loved it very much. I tended to go for the heavier glam metal, hair metal bands, but I still loved it all. There wasn't really much that I didn't like. Now, this is one of my favourite bands, Rat. I'm sure you all know Rat. This is my favourite Rat album. I know a lot of people go for Out of the Cellar, or Dancing Undercover, but Invasion of Your Privacy is my favourite Rat album. Love this. Lay It Down is one of my favourite metal songs of all time. I think it has one of the best riffs ever made, that big sleazy hook riff that starts off and all the way through Lay It Down. The great chorus, just a perfect song. Well, I think one of the best metal songs ever made, Rat, Lay It Down. But the other songs I love on here is You're in Love, Never Use Love, and Dangerous But Within the Risk is also pretty good and quite a rocking song. And I'll Give It All too, Give It All. I tend to find with this album, it is my favourite Rat album, but I tend to find the first half, the first five, well, the first four definitely are the best songs on the album for sure. The first four is outstanding. Still an excellent album all the way through, and it is my favourite Rat album. And I like Detonator too, Ron Haggerty. I know you talk about wanting to get Detonator, but I love it too, and I think it's a great album, and good luck anyone if we can find that. I'm always looking for that. But there we go, Rat, Invasion of Your Privacy. What year was this? This is 1985. This is the CD that I actually bought in 1985. It's the actual, that version. And also, this is one of the very first albums I bought on CD. So when CDs were first really coming out, well, certainly in Australia anyway, when you're starting to see them trickle through, this is one of the very first CDs that I bought, or first albums I bought on CD, I should say, and that was back in 1985. So yeah, I'll always keep it anyway because I love the album, but quite an historic piece for me. So 1985. It's even got the old disclaimer, remember, that used to say, this music on the compact disc was originally recorded in analog. There may be little bits and pieces that it's missed. Remember the early CDs? They used to write that disclaimer on the back. And finish up with something crushingly heavy, ultra technical and crushingly heavy, and I'm talking about South Carolina's own Nile. See, even when you say Nile, you got to say it properly. You got to say Nile. You got to say it like that, because they are just, man, this is one of the best death metal bands in the world. I always say that. And considering for a lot of the time they've only been a three-piece with Carl, Dallas, and of course George Kalias on drums, one of the best drummers in the world. I mean, that dude is just, I don't know how he does it. I seriously do not know how he does it. And this album sometimes I feel is a bit underrated in Nile's catalogue. This is Ithyphallic. Now this came out in 2007. This is their 5th album. Hang on, getting a bit of glare on there. And I love it. I love all Nile's albums. They haven't done anything below about an 8 out of 10. In their Darkened Shrines and Annihilation of the Wicked are my 2 favourite Nile albums. But oh, man, I love this. There's so many good songs on here. You've got the title track, Ithyphallic, which is really good. You've got The Essential Salts, which is one of my favourite Nile songs. You've also got What Can Be Safely Written, which is the big starter of the album. And, now let me read it for you. It's hard because it's in small, but I'll go from memory as best I can in reading. You've got the song, Papyrus containing the spell to preserve its possessor against attacks from he who is in the water. Yes, Nile are known for their long song titles at times. If you don't know Nile, they're a brutal death metal band, technical death metal band as well, highly technical, and are very much themed about Egypt and all the stories of ancient Egypt and the gods and all sorts of stuff. Pretty much entirely all themed around Egypt and ancient Egypt. And as I say, they're from Greenville, South Carolina. Carl, Dallas, and George. Brutal. If you don't know Nile and you do like extreme and you do like death metal, check them out. They are absolutely fantastic. Nile. So there we have. That's what I've been listening to. Yeah, I like to share. I always say that. I always like to share what I've been listening, and I like to share music as much as I can. I just think it's important that a lot of, obviously, especially metal and more obscure music as well, not even in metal, but obscure music, the best way to get it heard and to keep the bands going that make all this music is to share it around and tell people about it as much as possible, so that these bands can keep making and artists can keep making great music. So I'm always willing to share, and I know it's, you know, I've found lots of things from people sharing and telling me, so hopefully that you know, people see something that I'm showing and check it out, and you never know, that might be your next new favourite band. So look, I really appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me, and I'll catch you soon.